Right, so if you thought that Keir Starmer's authoritarianism only extended to purging rotten lefties or driving them away from the party in disgust like yours truly, along with rigging candidate selections to ensure only the right faction ever have a hope of standing to be an MP under his diktat, then boy have I got a wake-up call for you. Because actually, as this election campaign is showing, and in particular this latest revelation, not only is Starmer ensuring only his chosen ones ever get a shot at Parliament, being an MP, but if you aren't campaigning hard enough for these candidates, you'll actually get punished for it as well. Yes, Keir Stalin is very much back, actually coming down on his own campaigners like a ton of bricks, what few he still has, not now campaigning for other parties like the Greens, if they aren't, in the eyes of his red Tories, pulling their weight. Right, so what's the crack here then, Damo? Well, when I first read this story, I thought on one hand it is absolutely believable, given the dictatorial streak Starmer has shown towards party members and the iron fist rule he's instigated, and on the other hand how few people he likely has physically out campaigning for the party. But that instead of encouraging more people and trying to get more members out campaigning for candidates they probably had no say in selecting, have had inflicted upon them, amongst them some truly awful people the Starmer regime thinks he can just get into Parliament by dumping them in a safe seat and taking their local members there for granted. Instead, the approach has been to crack a whip on them, it seems, to flog those who are still prepared to give up their time and volunteer for his party to get the vote out. And it actually gave me mental images of people with bunches of Labour leaflets in their hands in a kind of a Ben-Hur style Roman galley or trireme chained at the oars with the likes of Luke Akehurst or Keir Starmer or Morgan McSweeney or some other blue Labour bod whipping them for not shoving them fast enough through people's doors. I've also had mental images of these self-same people punching themselves in the face because what is reportedly happening is so self-defeating, it beggars belief, and genuinely makes me wonder if these people are right in the head. You see, in order to campaign effectively in the Labour Party, they have access, of course, to collated data in their local areas, their constituencies, their local patches, and who to knock on whose door to most effectively get out the Labour vote. All of this is held on a system called Contact Creator, and in order to get others mobilising and doing their bit as well, there's another system called Organise, that's pretty self-explanatory really, isn't it? Well, Starmer's regime is removing access to these tools if campaigners are apparently not campaigning hard enough where they want them campaigning. They are literally barring their own people from being able to campaign effectively if they're not doing it enough or in the right places. Make it make sense, Damo, I can hear you cry. Well, I'm not utterly unhinged, sadly, but this is the apparent method to Starmer's madness. Where what few campaigners, relatively speaking, Starmer has left scattered about the country, he and his cabal at the top of the party want them deployed where they can be most effectively and fundamentally the punishment of having Contact Creator and Organise access withdrawn from them is where they are not going where the Labour regime wants them, which might not be in their own constituencies in the places they want to be campaigning. You see, if the party considers a given constituency particularly safe, or a seat they have absolutely zero chance of winning, so thinly stretched are they now, having always been reliant on a ground game at elections, a ground game thanks to Starmer's machinations that has evidently been destroyed, the Labour are now at the point where they are literally punishing campaigners trying to get their local candidate elected, if that is deemed to be a waste of time and effort, where such time and effort might be better used in another seat where a given candidate is considered more vulnerable. Because as regular viewers will know, especially in light of Labour's position over Israel and Gaza, as much as polls say a massive majority is on the cards for Labour, the reality appears to be they are likely, as we've seen in the last several local elections, to gain some seats for Labour, but also lose seats they already hold. It's those seats Labour wants what is left of its boots-on-the-ground campaign force operating in, and are punishing anyone not doing it or seen to be not campaigning enough elsewhere as the leadership demands. It's a process the party has called twinning, where campaigners from a given constituency are paired up with another, more vulnerable constituency with fewer campaigners in it, where they are expected to basically campaign in both, double the work, and if you don't do it, you lose access to campaign paraphernalia for your own constituency, where a given campaigner, I am sure, would much rather be. You can imagine this is causing hell up and could easily backfire on the party. On one hand, you have campaigners wishing to see their perhaps incumbent Labour MP re-elected and wish to make sure of that, as was always previously the case. Those seats where many local campaigners have deserted Labour being more vulnerable now is where Labour want those people deployed instead. You can imagine the reception they get in such seats might not be the friendliest these days. Labour's failure to put a transformative agenda different from the Tories forward. Its pro-Israel position ongoing regarding Gaza, all playing a part and taking its toll. And if they knock on the doors of former Labour campaigners expelled or who left, you can imagine they might get quite short shrift. I don't imagine it is much fun to campaign for Labour at all these days, despite having been out of power for 14 years. But my sympathy in that regard does not stretch very far, not with Starmer leading them. Of course, by campaigning more strongly in some areas at the expense of others, spreads Labour's campaign capabilities all the more thinly. And where Labour has decided, for example, that a given seat is safe enough that it doesn't require campaigners, or as many, or as much campaigning, and might actually be sanctioning people for campaigning there by removing their communication and canvassing tools from them over that they might call that wrong, and that gives other parties, other campaigns, a boost in those areas. They can certainly capitalise on that. There's a certain element of karma here in my mind when I think back to the 2017 general election and how Labour finances and resources were abused, and how finances in particular were used to shore up right-wingers already in safe seats. Now we have a Labour so bereft of campaigners and arguably finance, certainly finance from ordinary working class people, as the party enjoyed previously, now a party of donors again instead. They are having to effectively punish and coerce what campaigners they've got left, arguably to shore up some of the same people who were recipients of more than their fair share before, simply because as right-wingers they were the favoured ones behind Corbyn's back in 2017. But are amongst the most reviled candidates this time out amongst all of Labour's offerings, of course. It's not just amongst the campaigners, though, that this is causing issues with, because many of those self-same candidates who are seen to either not be worth investing in or considered to be safe enough to not need a campaign per se are angry as well. And that doesn't bode well for a future Labour government filled with backbenchers who, should they manage to be elected anyway, will feel they were not supported by Starmer. So is that setting Starmer up with a potentially healthy majority, but with a lot of people behind him who will not be particularly fond of him at all, and arguably eye him with as much distrust on the quiet as many of us do as voters? But as much as the process is being referred to as twinning, implying campaigners are only being stretched across 2 constituencies, it's actually a whole lot worse than that. Labour's ground game is so much weaker than even that will allow. As the parliamentary candidate put in charge of election coordination, as if the thought of having Rachel Reeves as Chancellor wasn't depressing enough, her younger sister Ellie Reeves is the election coordinator for Labour. It has been reportedly said that she sent out an email saying, anyone who is making more than 500 contacts a week in their own seats will be required to attend 5 twin seat campaigning sessions a week. In other words, if you've enough time on your hands that you can knock on 500 doors in your constituency, you will be expected, required, to attend not 1 other, but 5 other campaign sessions in other constituencies. Well, that might be feasible in theory in an urban area, a city with lots of small constituencies close together, but large rural ones, that'd be impossible. And it assumes you have enough time on your hands to have that much time spare to give it to the party. Not volunteer it. This isn't volunteering after all. This is demanding with an or else attached to the end of it if you don't, because they'll take away your access to the campaign stuff. Let's consider as an example, therefore, according to this Ellie Reeves diktat instruction, my end of the country here in Cornwall. Labour are, according to polling, expected to win, I think, 2 of Cornwall's 6 seats, if memory serves. But let's imagine they were all expected to go Labour. Let's imagine Labour were going to win all 6 Cornish seats. So if you were campaigning in Truro and Falmouth, for example, and had made 500 contacts, you'd then be expected to campaign in every other Cornish constituency within the week, or presumably risk losing contact creator and organised access. I hope you've got a decent car and can afford lots of fuel, Cornish roads being what they are, but that could be the picture in more rural areas. That's my interpretation of this. Of course, Labour tends to be stronger in more urban areas, so perhaps this is an unlikely example, but no differentiation is mentioned. In some instances, people have even now been stopped from printing more election materials for the sake of not campaigning elsewhere as Labour HQ is demanding. Labour's ground game clearly is in absolute dire straits, and deservedly so. So if you can campaign and get out for other parties or independents and have wondered whether it's worth it in doing so, given Starmer is still predicted to get a very large majority, well, the answer, going by Labour's own actions, is clearly yes, because in an awful lot of seats, they're clearly going to be very, very beatable. Making matters even worse for Labour campaigners, though, is that their candidates, be they former MPs or newbies, are across the country avoiding the very people whose votes they want. Perhaps they're being forced to campaign elsewhere too, and that is why they keep failing to turn up to hustings. Certainly doesn't explain why they run away from people asking questions in the street, though. Perhaps they're running late for a twinning session, in which case. Whatever the case, this video recommendation here will tell you all about some of the Labour wannabe MPs running away from their own voters, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.